What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 39th episode of Super Brain Radio, the fourth installment of Chapter 8, Plasticity, where we're explicitly going over what does neuroplasticity mean, what is it, and most specifically today we're covering what does it look like in motion. Now, this is going to be a novel episode in that it will summate a lot of things for you and cover an analogy that you'll find on the PDF document, but it is not the protocols episode, obviously. The protocols episode will be episode 40 next week, where we cover my favorite protocols for promoting neuroplasticity. And as you may have noticed in the past, it's going to go beyond just supplementation. It's the synergy of supplementation, mindset, and exercise that truly do something special when it comes to bolstering adaptation in the first place. Now, for today's episode, it's going to involve taking what we've learned from the previous three and putting together an analogy, a motion picture in your head, if you will, of what does it mean to go from point A to point B of neuroplastic change. I'm going to cover two examples. I'm going to cover a medical type of example and a sports performance type of example. And the first one that we're going to cover, this medical-like, we're going to reference some stories about rhesus monkeys that come from books and research that have promoted our idea of what does it mean for this scientific monkey to be tested on today. And more importantly, we're going to go from point A to point B about how this monkey's brain changed throughout what we're about to expose you to. So imagine, let's say the skill at hand is throwing a ball at a wall and rhythmically catching it with your other hand. So like some type of rubber bouncy ball at a wall straight in front of you, throw with the right, catch with the left, throw with the left, catch with the right, that type of concept. Now, imagine this monkey went ahead and participated in the skill for a couple years, got pretty good at it to the point where it can essentially do it subconsciously. It can just throw and throw and throw and throw, and through EMGs maybe we've determined that there is true minimal electrical activation in active areas, and this is mostly anticipatory and rhythmic in its nature. So now let's say we remove the monkey's right arm. And we did this for ethical and vaguely ethical, I guess, means, whatever. And now as we study this monkey's brain in this participation of left to right, right to left ball throwing skill, we're going to notice that at first, even if rhythm, the monkey cannot participate in the skill. Now, it's not just that the surgery enough of the arm removal was novel and stimulated brain change, although that may be enough from what we understand. What we're really about to see is that it's the rehabilitative process and the return to participation after that's really setting the avenue. So now that the surgery has happened and the rehabilitative process is beginning, we have this blank state of novelty where we're going to be hypersensitive to anything. And let's say the first thing we do is we take the ball away and we just go left arm throw, rhythmic pause where it's left arm throw, wait, 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 left arm catch, as if everything was happening exactly the same. This is going to recruit hippocampal and motor associated memories to the old pattern, and we are no longer going to start from zero, but this novel intervention is going to stimulate the beginnings of neuroplastic change. LTP getting red hot in these previously coordinated neurons is going to give birth to the opportunity for any of these four mechanisms of neuroplastic change that we've talked about to happen. Now let's say we progress the monkey's rehabilitative process, and now neuroplasticity is coursing through its motor cortex, its sensory cortex, and its left to right afferent efferent signaling, and probably what we'll end up seeing here is compensatory masquerade, where something distant and distal to the area is giving up responsibility or electricity, if you will, to make up for it. And in this case, these right arm neurons, if you will, are going to now contribute to left neuron recruitment and work without necessarily having to alter the actual brain structure. What we're seeing is it's a functional change here. And Over time, as this rehabilitative process becomes chronic and moves into life, and the monkey maybe develops a new left throw, left catch phenomenon skill in the same exact rhythm, and we look at the brain all over again, now we've seen structural change. Now we've seen right arm neurons who have actually become left arm neurons. And even though the right arm is attached to a degree, but it can't participate in catch, it can still actually, in fact, get better at this new similar skill than it ever was prior. Now let's dive into something a bit more realistic. Let's talk some type of sport performance skill. Let's talk something that involves the frontal plane, meaning lateral movement, not forward back type of hip extension and flexion. We're going side to side here. Let's incorporate something like this because it involves a lot of anatomy that is specific to skill, whereas a lot of gross motor function occurs in the sagittal plane, like hip flexion extension, and skill might not mean as much. So let's say it's some type of sport performance athlete in the frontal plane who has some type of major knee reconstructive surgery, and this is going to obviously inhibit their ability to participate in the frontal plane. All field sports have frontal plane action. I would even include basketball in that as well, because it's obviously true. So if we have a specifically damaged area that is highly important and integral to participation in this frontal plane skill, whatever it may be, we are going to see a similar phenomenon occur. So let's again begin post-surgery in this scenario where we have this blank slate and we are hypersensitive to novelty. What needs to happen first and foremost is the engagement of other frontal plane muscles in both motions that are just done in a safe environment to remind the brain that it is safe to participate in this motion once again. That will be enough novelty to get LTP super hot, to stimulate proliferative change, and the brain can start doing its thing. Now, this exposure is more than enough to actually begin the process of neuroplastic change. But what matters most in the sports performance environment is what you do thereafter. Because they didn't lose a limb, the knee is going to regain function in modern day relatively quickly. So what we can actually notice is that we're going to have a blunted response if the subsequent actions in the sports performance rehabilitative process are not correct. So now as LTP gets super, super hot and we have the opportunity to restructure, change functionally, and do all these cool things, it needs to be highly specific to the skill and motions you want to rehabilitate. And most importantly, we need to continue the novel process of keeping LTP high, which is more difficult when you want to do it chronically over time, to ensure that now these new neuroplastic changes are directly associated from a motor sensory environment to not just what they were before, but we can now use this wave of neuroplastic functionality to increase the ultimate resultant, which is their frontal plane skill, to a better place than it ever was before. So in motion, as a cascade, we can kind of look at, if you will, is one, and you'll see this in the PDF document, exposure. Even though exposure itself is enough to stimulate the novel change, you heard me mention, which I've mentioned many times in this chapter, safety and vigilance perceptions of the brain. Now, this is just as much metaphysical and emotional as it is actually cortically defended. But if your perception of the recovery from the surgery, if you will, or your participation in the exposure is not as highly negative, but more importantly, resistant and high-toned and not actually able to participate mindfully, you're going to have a severely blunted response and potentially maladaptation in the future. So manage exposure success as much as the person's perception or the participant's perception of the environment and exposure itself. The second which is going to be happening in the middle, and this is talking about the continuation of long-term potentiation. Praise and reaffirmation and success rates are really important. And that doesn't mean treat it like a little baby around their grandparents where you just scream and cheer for everything. What we're talking about is reaffirming the proper environment and the proper skills and the proper participations, because we talked about this continuum and wave of neuroplasticity that can be blunted if it's not specific enough and not similar enough. So be weary of how you reaffirm things, because if not, this compounding adaptational process that is blind and that is already ensuing despite what you want does not like to make U-turns. It's very difficult to rewrite the natural, novel, proliferative process after a surgery or after a major trauma or even after a long off season. Lastly, and the most important aspect, if you will, of maturation of the neuroplastic cascade is going to be expressing control over the multivariate environment. So, oxygen debt, creatine phosphate, multiple HRVs, glucose, fatty acid, the movement of carbons and methyl groups, different types of HRVs, different emotional states, different success rates and complexities within the skill, all need to have some type of success rate that has been trained purposefully, as well as an association. So when we finally get to a place where we want to ensure that this motor pattern, this cascade of neural electricity is what we use every time with minimal fail rates, with minimal mistakes, etc., you need to have gotten adaptations from each of the varied environments after your LTP and your neuroplastic altering molding, if you will, has been settled. And at that point, you can then focus on mastering something that's completely changed.